The audio you're about to hear was recorded in Anchor. Learn more at anchor.fm.
Welcome back to the Alexander Schmidt podcast, episode 016. This is a conversation with Mr. Wesley Schantz, and he's a friend from graduate school in St. John's, has a master's degree from there. He's also, what sort of scholar are you again, Wes?
Hey, hi Alex. Hey, I got my undergrad in Spanish. Studied in Spain on Granada, and after that I did some things in Boston, teaching in an elementary school there. I don't know if that counts as scholarship, but I certainly learned a lot. And then I taught English in Uruguay, Fulbright. If that's what you're thinking of.
Yes, that was what I was thinking of. Good. And you were a teacher down in Arizona for 4 years before you moved up to Washington?
Yeah, I've got this idea that I'm going to write at some point a book that's going to be about those 4 years in the desert, and it's going to be kind of answering, C.S. Lewis's Four Loves, because that's something everyone liked to talk about there, and I haven't yet read it, so I'm waiting to read the book, and then when I read the book, I'll write my answer to it.
I really love that. Maybe we'll have a chance to maybe we can do a podcast and read that together and give twin analyses or something like that.
There's so much to read and so much to write and do, and so I'm really glad. While I was there, I remember when you would talk about trying to get people from St. John's together to write stuff and to talk and to continue that conversation. Once we left St. John's, and this is, I'm sure people can relate to, once you leave college or leave grad school and you're trying to, start life, and you miss all those things that were, such a big part of your life when you were living the scholarly existence.
Right. Major subroutines.
Now that you've actually done it, it's wonderful, right? I mean, it seems like it's going pretty well.
Yeah,
so I'm
well,
happy to get to talk to you here, and interested to see where this goes.
Well, it's so funny because, there's that quote that's, if you look around the room and you don't see the person you want to see, then it might be you. And I mean, honestly, when I first started teaching the great books and teaching Homer and Virgil and Dante, and I was looking for resources and well, for one, it was hard to find good resources that were interesting, especially for the Iliad and the Aeneid. They're just not as popular as the Odyssey. The Odyssey is a lot easier to find materials on. But finding a community of people too who was interested in these materials was hard, but also very possible, which was interesting because I had parent seminars my first few years as a teacher, and they started getting pretty popular. We'd get 10, 15 people to come talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey, and even to read the Iliad and the Odyssey. I think it's pretty impressive for, people who are parents, which means they don't have much time. And they were interested, and, well, that meant a lot. And the school at which I teach is really into the idea of the great books, and that's really cool as well. And so eventually 5 years in, it turns out that I've been studying these books for the last 5 years, and I just feel like it's time to share the message with a wider audience.
Well, so I'm interested in, for one thing, the parents and how they approach the books and how your experience with that has been. In the schools in Phoenix, we had a community seminar sort of open to the community, but in practice it was mostly teachers who would end up going. Occasionally a student would go, occasionally a parent would go, and sometimes the teachers were parents, and so it was a little bit of crossing that. But they were wonderful and all, but I always kind of wondered why more parents didn't show up, and I'm sort of curious. And now in Spokane, where I'm living now, so my fiance and I, we've started a community reading group, and we meet in the library and we read great books, but we don't have much attendance. Like it's a few friends, people we invite personally that show up. So, and I just think maybe it does take that kind of bigger personality to be that person in the room who says, hey, let's talk about this thing. And then everyone wants to talk about it, turns out. So,
well, you definitely have to be a major anomaly, I would say. Yeah. You have to stand out. And because I think to some extent people are attracted to that, like you're saying, the notion of the personality, more than the book itself. However, I think the book offers the hook that you can put that personality or that charisma on, because most people wish they had read most of the great books at some point, but never found the time or inclination to. So it's a really great excuse to do a really great thing for yourself. And especially if the personality at the seminar delivers. If they say some interesting stuff, they get you thinking, you feel like you're in a new space, you're experiencing novelty for the first time. Thinking itself might be novelty for you, depending on how routine your life is, right? Because you might have it so dialed in that you're not even, you're not considering new ideas very frequently.
Well, I think you're onto something there, because, that's the experience of thinking for me whenever I have a really new idea, which is maybe not that often, really. Right. I don't know if you remember, so in the beginning of Crime and Punishment, which is one of the books that we got to teach at my old school. Very cool. In 10th grade.
We teach the Brothers K.
Yeah, that one too. But so early on, it says something about how Raskolnikov, he wants to have a new thought. He wants to say a new word, I think is the way that it's put most of the time. And it's like the gravity of that, right? Like maybe at first it doesn't seem like so much to say, thinking a thought or having a new thought. But whenever you do actually have a thought, like it's a very powerful experience. It's
magnetic. It's absolutely magnetic. And in fact, I think that's probably what the great personality actually is. Somebody who's thinking and having so many thoughts that they're attracting new thoughts around them. And so that they're probably subject to the Pareto distribution, which we know about, which suggests that the positive loops that create, once you start having those good thoughts, you then attract people with good thoughts around you, start exchanging those sorts of thoughts with them, and boom, it's like an intellectual community, and wow, now you're the people having all the thoughts, and, that's Silicon Valley right now for technology. And perhaps San Diego soon for the great books.
So now, I just think that there's we got to say, like, the person that sort of inspired a lot of this immediately here, this podcast thing, right, is Jordan Peterson.
Absolutely.
You put me on to listening to him, and I've been listening, to most of what I think he's got as his main sort of podcast stream at this point, and it's fascinating. And now I know words like the Pareto distribution, but more importantly, I think it's not so much just the ideas, but like you're saying, it's this kind of sense of getting in touch with something, which is.
Well, I feel like what we've experienced in culture that almost everybody would agree with is some form, a stultification of the creative. We're all arguing and criticizing all the time. I would say almost predominantly because we're not having good enough new creative product. Why?
Well, how much of that is just, dissatisfaction with the things that we're told are going to make us happy, right? And he's really harsh on happiness, and I think that's probably justified, because things like they end up just distracting you, all the things that are supposed to give you joy, and so you got to find joy somewhere that's not immediately obvious, but it's certainly there if you look.
Well, I have two streams on that. I would say that on the one hand, I think our creators need to create better things, and there's certainly really good things starting to come out visually in terms of, like, say, HBO and Netflix and stuff like that. But but it's I don't know. It's as if we have to create more meaning now, because that's what we're all hungry for. You don't become critical as a people when you have a shared endeavor, when you have a shared sense of meaning, because you don't have time for it. You have to work. You have things to do. And, there are minor criticisms here and there, but it seems like the major thrust of the youthful voice is a resentful and critical voice of not only of everything, really, of the status quo and it's interesting too, because it's led by people who have contributed the least amount to the culture that they criticize, and who feel the most oppressed by it, which is, it's ridiculous. Something I do with my students is I make them look at everything in their room, and maybe you could even do that right now. It's like, what in your room was not made by someone not you? And even if you look at the insides, it's like, man, the room itself, architect, construction worker? What about the electricity within that works all the time? What about the plumbing? Do you know how to deal with that in a sophisticated way? Could you go down into the sewer and deal with it? It's like, because there are people that do that, and they do that effectively, and you don't even know about them. And so it's like,
oh yeah, no,
it's coming from such an oversimplified view of who we are as a people that is ridiculous.
Well, that's a perennial issue, right? I mean, I think what's new about it is that the kids get a hold of each other in all these ways, and they're never really able to think for them. Like, they never did think for themselves in the past, right? They always in their little worlds, but now it's somehow a lot more visceral. Like,
everybody's got a walkie-talkie, and it's a kid's world. Wow, that's good.
They're always on the screen, and they're always. Well, and I don't know, it opens up new creative possibilities too, because you can learn to code, and you can make video games, you can make videos of yourself playing video games, and how cool is that? And that's great.
Podcasts.
But man, the more things that there are out there, and this goes back to the which one is it? The discussion in Phaedrus, is it, about writing? Plato, and he's got Socrates talking to Phaedrus, and he's got the speech in his pocket, right, that he's got written down.
Yes.
And like, very proud of the speech or something. But Socrates is implying, I guess, pretty strongly that with every new, gain in creativity and creative power through technology, you're bound to run out a little bit of what's innate, in your makeup and your ability to remember in speech. And so I think it's fascinating too that it comes back around, because with podcasts, the human voice has a new reach too. So it's sort of, I think that's really the interesting thing about the new creative modes, is that they revive old ones, right? Video games that are really
they're abstractions built on top.
Mm-hmm. And they do something new with it, and that's
because whereas technology in an intermediary stage might have kept us from being with each other by texting, even when we're in the same room, it now connects us in a major way, because you and I are friends living in different states. You in Washington, me in California, and we can have a genuine conversation with each other via the podcast that we can then share with our friends, who will probably have their own thoughts about what we say.
I hope so. Well, so I'm curious, because I haven't done it yet, but I've been meaning to, try making podcasts or videos or something, just to try that. But how do you feel about, what does it do to your writing, for example? Because I'm pretty keen on writing too, but every time I sit down to write, now there's this other little voice, one extra thing besides checking email, besides checking the phone. Now it's like, oh, maybe this is the day that I'll actually sit down and make a podcast. And so it's just like, I lose the thread a lot of times when I'm, I'll start doing one thing, and then I'll pick up something else, and I'll start doing that instead. And, and then I never finish anything. So I'm impressed that you've been able to start, putting out all these podcasts. But so what is it, if I might ask, like, what is it that you've had to give up now to make the time for this, and to make the space to focus on this new project?
Well, frankly speaking, about my writing, I would say that all my writing until now has been false writing. It's been ego-based. I believe now I can represent the self to some degree. And whatever I write from now on will be in my true voice, my adult voice. Everything that came before was written by a boy. So we'll see. But I think what's going to happen when I do write, which is now what happens when I speak, is I'm going to write what the truth is so far as I can see it. And without posturing, and without youthful arrogance, and without a resentment against my audience. I now am a teacher. And so what I do is teach. And so it's for me to illuminate through my voice and through my speech. And that is 100% my function in this world. So that's what's going to come through, I think. Is podcasting... Yes, yeah, because they're both my voice. And now they both represent my voice correctly. Because what I think people hate about writing is that they feel it's a poor representation of themselves, and they've practiced speaking so much more that they've forgotten that they had to practice so much in order to make it such a good representation of themselves. And in fact, any skill that you acquire that you become very good at is an excellent representation of the being that lies beneath you. And that's why people like to be associated with the things they're really good at and not the things they're really bad at. And so with writing, I think what often happens with people is they don't develop the skill to a high enough level to feel it represents them correctly. So they're constantly frustrated when they're trying to represent themselves through it. And,
yes,
and I think with my youthful writing, oh, go on. Sorry.
No, but that's postmodernism's insight as well, right? Like the angst in a way, or the bemusement that comes over you when you realize that, you know, what you're writing is contained only in these words, and these words are trying to get at these images and these ideas, but they never quite capture them, right? And so maybe the whole process is just fraught, and you might as well abandon it, but you must go on because you've identified it with yourself. And so there's this great postmodern angst in what you see in some of the writing. But I think it also opens up some incredible avenues of kind of humor and creativity. But that's beside the point. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
It's okay. Let's segue really quickly to some of the symbols we wanted to talk about, because that was something really exciting that I wanted to do with you, because your questions were so well founded that that came to you, and the things you said were so interesting that I just immediately had to respond to them because you made me think. And so I wanted to share first with the listeners something we were talking about before we got on air. We had a little 5-minute tete-a-tete first, and I was sharing this idea that I had just had today. So I teach Dante's Paradiso, and so my life is wedded to biblical imagery, which is very interesting because it wasn't like that growing up, but now it is. And so I had the notion today, in conjunction with listening to something about Jordan Peterson, that what the story of Adam and Eve within Eden might well represent is the experience of man becoming conscious and therefore losing his group identity and being therefore isolated from the group. And why? Because I'm losing his group identity and becoming an individual, his true nature shows through. What is true nature? His true nature is that he's an information gatherer, and that's why eating a fruit made him conscious. But we didn't know it would make him conscious beforehand, because the only way you could be conscious of the fact that you become conscious is you would have to have been conscious in the first place, which, well, he wasn't. And so, in being exiled from his original home of Eden, man has to do what? He has to work. What does that mean? Well, that means that he has to, what is the proper work of man as a now conscious individual? What's to acquire new information? Well, why would a conscious individual come about amongst a group of unconscious individuals all identified together? Well, that's easy. Such a group of unconscious individuals, without thinking for themselves, can't make adjustments. They don't have the power of Athena amongst them. They don't have an Odysseus to help guide them. They just have an Agamemnon, and we all know that won't work. So what does the conscious individual do while outside the group identity? That acquire new information, anomalous information, endure threat, the dragon, in order to get the gold. And then what's he have to do? Well, the same thing the man who leaves the cave of Plato has to. He has to come back in and boom, enrich the community with new information. And how does it enrich the community? It starts to create new individuals by bringing people to consciousness. And boom, who's doing that right now? Jordan B. Peterson. And boom, who's going to join him? Us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is the interesting dialectic of it all, right? This movement, right? You've got the individual who has something new to say, and he's by that very
using the logos, saying what he sees, and therefore becoming valuable just by expressing what he sees. It's incredible. That's all you need to do.
But by that token, right, he sort of fractures the established, what you call the group. You know, the group is no longer as
the group transforms as he transforms.
Yeah. And then, but by that same process, you've got this new group that's forming, right, of people who are onto this thing, and so it's new, but it's also old, right? It's a kind of a cyclical process.
That's right, and you can even see that at work in the Iliad, because it's all these peoples, these Achaeans who are actually different tribes of people from Argos, from Sparta, from Thesprotia, from Ithaca, from all over. And what do? They sort of transform into a nation state in order to deal with a superordinate goal of fighting against the Trojans. And in so doing, they're all transformed because they've never organized in that way before or behaved in that way before. And so it totally transforms their way of life. And I think that's how we work, except for we are now at a level of abstraction where we don't even need to change our behaviors, but we can change our maps of meaning or our belief systems by means of thought. We can actually change our entire lives if capable by altering our consciousnesses, by adding additional information in, which thus expands our maps of reality, which we can do now without even moving.
Well, yeah, but that is action, right? Like we do so much through these
abstraction
meetings.
Is action now. I think that's clearly true. That would, I think, sort of prove the notion of the unmoved mover, because that's obviously what's happening within us.
It must be said too that this does have big ramifications, though. Like, I mean, just taking a kind of extreme example, right? There's such a thing now as cyberbullying. So you don't ever have to like push the kid around or get in their face to be a bully, and on the other hand, you don't ever have to meet your oppressor to say that you're oppressed. And so there is something too, I think, for all that, you want to draw a distinction between harm and speech and all this and that. Well, I mean, I think it must be that there's something to that. And so I get a little bit impatient with Peterson, when he, far be it for me to take him on, but I think that there's something to be said for the postmodern approach and for the people who feel the need for safety, and there is something really there. And so I want to push back on that a little bit, because I know you're very much into that discussion. And so, well, one thing I wanted to ask about that was, to take it on a little bit, more abstract level, not so close to home maybe, but so what is the connection between the great stories of, say, the Greeks, the people we call the Greeks, right, as you point out, but so, the Homeric stories and the mythology of that Mediterranean world, how does that really how does that really translate, on a deeper, maybe symbolic level? How does it jive with, say the Judeo-Christian myths, or another mythology from somewhere else? Say, I've been reading Beowulf a lot lately. So how does it go with the Norse myths and the Nordic, the Germanic? How does it go with, I mean, maybe this is just asking too many questions in a row, but I think it's clear, right? How does one get to say with such certainty, because I don't deny that there's clarity and power in what's said, but I think there's got to be room for doubt too about, how much these stories all are telling the same story, how much, you can really access that truth. And I think that's where the postmoderns, they have a pretty good point.
I think of the stars in the sky, and they're all the same at one level of analysis because they're all stars and they shine light.
Mm-hmm.
But another level of analysis, obviously they have their own individual existences and possibly their own planets orbiting about them, and their own relationships to other stars and other asteroids in their particular galaxies. And so at one point, I think it's a level of analysis issue, because at one level of analysis, sure, all mythology is the same in that it tells the most useful information that humans have ever acquired, and continues to do that repeatedly, because humans should never forget anything that exists in their myths.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, they're all very rich and individual and of themselves. There's actually an issue that's picked up by Dante in the Paradiso, I think, very beautifully.
I gotta confess, I haven't read that one yet, so that's on my list. But
don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But maybe I can give you a frame of reference through which to enjoy it with even greater pleasure.
Yeah.
Something that you'll notice in the Paradiso is the flux between ones, which are twos, and that there will be a constant always drawn so that something can perform above it. Because when you have a constant, then you can actually see movement next to it. And so when something is constant and always present, you can see the thing that moves for what it really is. And of course, that which is always constant in the Paradiso is God's will. What does that allow for? Man to see himself for what he really is, which is the most beautiful gift that a man can have, because what does that mean? That means man has self-reflection. And boom, there's the Logos again, and let there be light. And so
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Well, that's Dante. And so what he does is he shows that humans can embody certain types. And in the way that they embody them, they follow certain general rules. So there's one level of analysis, right? Boom, you're a teacher.
The role.
So
sure.
Insofar as I'm a teacher, I follow the role of, say, Plato, Aristotle, Carl Jung,
Socrates.
Jordan B. Peterson, Socrates. And we all look different and we speak different languages, and I'm a different religion. For many of them, I'm a different ethnic. Many of them, I come from a different time. I wear different clothes. I have different friends. I have different technology. All those things are different. However, we do share certain fundamental principles, and I would say our same energeia and intellecheia, or rather telos. The end is the same, which is to cause maximum or best adaptation to the situation for this moment. How do we do that? Through, boom, shining a light and developing new minds. Because new minds are the things that make for maximal adaptation in the moment. Which is what Athena represents and why she's always with Odysseus.
Yeah, okay. I'm curious. Okay. Also, so to go back to the, I like the Dante. I mean, he represents a beautiful synthesis of the Mediterranean and the Christian.
Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't close that point, but so the individuals who say occupy the just rulers, you find them from the Hebrew David. You find them from the Roman tradition. You find Trajan in there. You find also even a mythological character from the Aeneid, Ripheus, and which I will argue when I lecture on this, and I tell my students is potentially Dante saying that Virgil did make it into heaven, because what is an epic poet more than his ideas and his characters? His character is in heaven. That's the greatest representation of him possible, even better than his body.
Yeah. So the personality is in itself kind of bifurcated. So one that's also two things.
Yes, it is universal in that it shines true light out from it, but it is also 100% individual because it is stamped completely with its time and everything that makes it unique. Because you might say that it's how Jordan Peterson talks about the King Arthur myth, where each one of the knights goes into the forest
right.
darkest to him. Well, that's exactly how an individual leaves Eden. They all leave different places and acquire new information. There's so much new information, though, that you can't possibly ever be exactly like somebody if you figure out one new thing.
It's the dark wood. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, Camus makes this point in The Stranger, right? That while the main character, the protagonist, is sitting in his jail cell, he thinks about how if you just had one day of life ever, you would have enough to think about for all eternity. And, well, you could probably even extend that to if you were sitting in one room ever, you could have infinite amounts of things to think about. And the fact that personalities are both universal and individual on the one hand makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. No, so one thing that just made me think of, you said sitting in the room, right? And coming back to something else that was a project of ours at one point. I got a hold of that book, that Solzhenitsyn book you recommended, Under the Rubble.
Yes. I just got my copy back.
I got it through interlibrary loan, which is awesome, and most libraries participate in. So those listeners, right, who, hear people talk about all these books, well, you can go and read those books. Like, you can get a hold of them. They're, not through the internet, which has got pretty much everything. Then if you like to have a physical copy, that can be arranged too. And so I think it's pretty important to, actually read these things for yourselves and get, into the close reading of it. And so I got that copy, and it made me think immediately, when I was reading, I just read like the foreword or something of Notes from Underground, right? Of Underground Man, and him, sitting in his room, brooding, and just how fascinating it is to, you can go one of two ways with that, right? You can become so stuck in your own dark wood and never come out of it.
Yes.
Or you can, you can find some way to exercise your truth in the world,
Yes. That is the right metaphor, Wes. That is the right metaphor, because that's what happened. Because that's what happened to Dante when his world disappeared, when he got exiled from Florence and lost his family, which couldn't go with him, his wife and his children, and all his political aspirations gone forever. And what restored him? Boom, the epic poem that he wrote instead. And it's like, dang, that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying that the biggest things in his life were taken from him, but it made room for him to make something even greater. And that's something that Carl Jung actually explicitly says about building his tower in Bullingen. He built a tower called The Tower out of stone, and it was like a medieval structure. So you might imagine that's what he thought of himself. And he said that he only had the energy to do that after his wife died. And so what does that mean? That means that a lot of his life and energy was dedicated towards his wife. And, when she disappeared, and this is how you deal with tragedy, he had to free that energy up. And that's really hard for people, because they have all these subroutines and all these things tied, and all these imaginary ideas tied to these people when they, think about doing things. They think about doing things with them. And so what did Jung do? Well, he reintegrated the energy and then applied it towards a major project. And so you were asking what happened with this. And I'd say that I was in my dark wood during my first years of teaching, not understanding my own purpose, and being in post St. John's or post structured realities, sort of dark wood hell. And what is this? This is an acceptance of role and of moving towards meaning, because sitting resentfully around doing nothing and criticizing reality just doesn't seem like any fun as an adult.
Yeah, I hear that. I was sitting and reading. I don't know if you've got around to it yet. The Righteous Mind.
No.
Have you seen that? I just happened to see it at the library at the school where I've been teaching, and so I started reading that. And this is just a funny little anecdote that I wanted to share with you to that purpose. So it's like exam week, right? And I'm done with giving my exams for the day. So I really could have left.
Sure.
Didn't have to stay at school. What's that?
I probably would have. I'm a Libra.
But then I was like thinking to myself, I know that's the wrong thing to do, right? Like I know I'm supposed to stay, 'cause, I'm paid to be there all day, all school day. And
right, sure, of course. Oh, now I understand. Yes.
That's what I'm saying. I could have left, and I stayed, and I found this book, first of all. So I was like, oh, cool. I've been, meaning to find that book. And so I started reading. It's wonderful. It's great. And so I was reading that, and then this kid, he came over and he's like, hey, is this seat taken? He clearly wanted to talk. So we started talking, and he started telling me, like, he's trying to decide. He's a junior. Should he join the Marines to be with his brother, or should he, go his own route, let his brother do his own thing? And not to get too much into his story, but it was really moving to me, because it was like this small decision, I could have, I knew it was not the right thing to do, but something great turned out to come about from it.
Feeling. And, something I was thinking about earlier, which I think is interesting and supports your point, is that, something I just realized, which I'd been trying to realize for years, and which people had been telling me, is that, I thought about my life up until now, and I'd lived a life that was a real emotional roller coaster, and I had chosen that sort of life. And that's, to some extent, a good life to me. However, the last couple of years, I've been sort of steeped in study and not pursuing things which have a ton of emotional valence, and I realized that that's most likely because I had just gotten out of a major relationship, and I had actually consciously chosen, I said this out loud and then laughed at myself. No more emotions for 2 years. And then I immediately said back to myself, well, then no meaning. And then I this and said this out loud. Because emotions determine the meaning of a situation, not thought.
Absolutely.
Thought can only identify what the emotion signifies. Boom. I left my mind and I became a person.
Dude,
because no thought is just a little reflection system built on top of your intuition system, which is a bunch of pattern recognizers. Your emotions are so much deeper down the amygdala and the hippocampus. And I mean, they tell you everything, and they've always told us everything. And so the fact that our thinking, and you can tell just how simple your thinking and your abstraction system is based on the fact that you can watch cartoons. And I do, I don't say that insultingly, I do it too. And it's like,
oh yeah,
it's so superficial in that it is built on top of everything. I mean, even being a weightlifter, I've blacked out before exerting myself as hard as possible. And what does that mean? Well, that means that my systems were so strained that I couldn't represent reality in the moment that I did that. Which I imagine is what alcohol does to you when it blacks you out, that you have become so poisoned that your body no longer has the necessary resources to support representational memory. And a representation of reality. Yeah,
no, I'm following you, but I think it's interesting though, you know, for all that the emotions and the largest part of your life is lived, you know, underneath and behind and maybe in front of reason or whatever you want to call it. It's still that spark of the logos, right? That is the thing that gives meaning to all of that, right?
That's true.
They're mutual. They're mutually, I mean,
into being what is in the being. So logos needs to speak the truth about being, and that's what the Trinity is. So there's the being, and then there's the being spoken into truth, and there's the act of speaking, which is why humans are supposed to tell the truth, because it brings additional being into reality, because truth and being are the same thing, and that's why beings crave truth, which is what manna is.
So let me push you on this then, just to, I mean, this is another thing that frustrates me. I don't know how to say it exactly.
Yes.
With Jordan Peterson, he's always getting asked by people, so are you a Christian, right? It's a simple question.
So it's a rough question, I would say, because because again, that's in the level of analysis problem, right? Because so if say somebody comes up to me and says that they couldn't talk to me because the Lord is the spirit of truth for them, and he tells them what is true. Are they inviting me to talk to them and speak the truth? Or are they telling me that there's only one way of truth getting to them and I can't be involved in it? And so,
right.
To that question of like, say, are you a Christian? They then attempt to constrain you by whatever they believe that question means. So you don't know what you're agreeing to is the problem with answering that question. Even so, Peterson, I think, answers it in the way that I would like to answer it, in that, well, look at all my obvious behaviors. That is the clearest indication of what a Christian is. And in a Western culture where all our rules and laws come from the behavioral mindset set by existence with a church structure, until, very recently, we all act like Christians, even if we say we are or not.
I appreciate that, I suppose.
And I don't think he's trying to cop out on it. I don't think he's trying to act like he's more than he is, but rather he doesn't want to just say something that will then blithely be used as a criticism against him. So just think about it. Like newspapers, people would love for him to say that sort of thing because immediately every commentator who's Christian can have an opinion about him, and boom, their voices spring into life. And it's...
Yeah.
Well, they can already do that because of Genesis too. So, it's just for the listeners. He's done 15 lectures on just Genesis in the Bible. So he's long-winded too.
Yeah, but it's forgivable, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. We, you gotta risk. As I constantly tell my students, if the pursuit of truth is like archery, and that you shoot at the target and you keep shooting and your spread gets, more and more refined, then you're going to make it, you have to make the most amount of errors of anybody to be the best shooter, because that means you can endure the pain of making errors in order to refine towards the truth. And that's what speaking is too, I think. And that's why I feel so lucky lecturing for several hours a day, several days a week for the last 5 years. Which has allowed me
training regimen. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the toughest customers I could imagine, high school freshmen and sophomores. And so, if you can make it with them, maybe you can make it anywhere. You know that. You walk the high school beat.
Oh yeah. It's good to get a chance to talk to other people too. Just say it that way.
It's funny what you said about that kid too. Just something to mention about teachers, and maybe we can close in a minute here, because this is our first time doing this. We've had some good stuff, but who knows when we'll run out. But just something about being a teacher, and I'd love to just have an entire conversation about things you've learned about human nature due to being a teacher. And I know everybody's interested in that because everybody's interested in teachers because everybody's had a teacher. And everybody's had a lot of teachers. And hopefully people have had an interesting teacher. And if they haven't, we'll make up for that now. So it's just the cues that the little humans, the students give you, especially the high school ones, because they're practically adults, and people forget how similar and different they are from high schoolers. And they forget how similar they are in terms of all their attitudes and beliefs and many of their thoughts. They forget, however, how honest and how witty and acerbic a little person can be. And when you are constantly exposed to honest humans who are watching you alertly, you learn about yourself very quickly, but you also learn how to pick up on real cues because you're dealing with real situations. You're managing people. And so you have to jump out of your head and get rid of a lot of the false notions about yourself and how things work in reality in order to have a smooth and good learning environment. So if you're too proud and you don't understand certain flaws you have and you don't make certain adjustments, you're just going to keep having the same problems over and over. So you have to start seeing things for what they actually are. And that often means seeing the many, many, many flaws you have as a person and teacher, which has been a wonderful thing about being a teacher because, well, the better, the more you better yourself, the better it is for your students, which is the best reason possible to better yourself, and has been very good for me. But the fact that you can see little things like that you start to see it when somebody wants to talk, it. And they probably are acting like that around you too because, well, they trust you. You're a teacher. You're an adult. Right. And it's interesting seeing how people act like that because they're like Peterson talks about with the little and the big rat, right? They're like trying to invite you to play.
Yeah, it is play. It is. And I just want to bring it back to something, I think you said this before we even started recording, but you mentioned that, part of the symbol of the Garden of Eden and leaving it is that somehow Eve is instrumental there, right? And it's Adam seeing Eve, it's Adam speaking with Eve, and that kind of give and take.
Yes, so it's funny because I was trying to repeat my initial argument, and so I totally lost my train of thought, and I know I didn't make it near air, which is just deeply unfortunate, but yeah, so what I was saying is that it's man's encounter with nature that makes him conscious because that's the only thing that could make him conscious because it's pure anomaly. It's something you can't deal with. And what do you do when you can't deal with something? Boom, thought, awareness kicks into being. And so it is man's encounter with the feminine, or rather nature as represented through the feminine, that spurs him on to consciousness. And I know Peterson said some very interesting things about this, saying, literally speaking, since sexual selection is governed by the women with humans,
right.
They became intelligent first. They ate from the apple, as it were. They acquired information, and that they then selected for intelligent men. And there's sort of an evolutionary arms race between them, which, in terms of positive feedback loops, creating incremental and thus exponential growth at some point. we are a lot smarter than every other creature on the planet by far. So that seems like a pretty easy fact to see.
For all that we know, we are. Now, so one book I read recently, which I just want to throw out there, is Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know if you've read that one.
Sure, I've read it.
Okay, but so the mice are actually the smartest beings.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, but I think we're thinking metaphorically when we say that sort of thing. So like, I think we actually have a valid point when we say things like the mice or the dolphins are happier because their being isn't split into two in the way that ours is.
Yeah, right.
They're completely at one with themselves. And so in a Taoist sort of way, you could say that's more intelligent and that's a very prudent thing to do. But in terms of actually being top of the dominance hierarchy and eating the most amount of different animals ever,
Right.
because if you think every other predator has what? A few things it can eat from? We've eaten everything. We eat everything. So that alone is most dominance. And yeah, we can say that it's going to lead to our own destruction, but that's not an argument against intelligence because that's just a libertarian argument.
Not at all. I just wanted to say, I think it's very important to bear in mind, well, to be honest, I think, the gist of what I'm trying to say with that is that it's in all seriousness, the importance of laughing, right, at yourself and being, right,
because that's when you realize it's all play.
Yeah, the play element, and beyond that too, to be really, serious about it for a sec. I think, that's what you, in a way, you see in Eve or whoever. If you're Eve, you see it in Adam or whatever you want to say. But you see something that you can imagine is whole and nature and right, like what you've lost, what you're not, and yet it's part of you and it belongs to you and you love it. And I think that love is also such a big part of the trust that you're speaking about with, kids trusting you and wanting to talk, and the ability to perceive that is something akin to love. And I think that is something that, again, that Peterson is not shy about saying when he's pushed to say it, but I haven't heard him yet fully articulate that thought, I guess. And I would just,
because there are so many, Joseph Campbell followers and people, and all this sort of people that are doing this sort of modern transformation of Protestantism and individualized truth into this pigeon yoga system. Deepak Chopra, whose opprobrious ideas wouldn't be helpful to a mindless idiot, not
just I don't know if you've become aware of this, but the Campbell language about myth is very much pervading, if I understand it correctly, the new Common Core standards. They're
my goodness, that's what I need to educate myself on. I've not to that.
I gotta say, I haven't looked into it too closely, but in my anecdotal experience, it sounds an awful lot like they're taking the hero's journey and basing a big part of 7th or 8th grade English on just that. And it's so I don't know, make of that what you will, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. It's funny. The thing about the hero's journey is that if anybody tries to teach it according to structure, they're going to miss the entire essence of it.
Yeah, it's too much abstraction, too much
individual, and so how do you? There's not a rule book to it. It's you got to go out and face that which you feel. It's going to be totally different from everybody else. So you actually just have to face what you fear, and that's the encounter with nature because you encounter your own limitations when you face that which you fear. It determines you. It shows you what you are, and when you see what you are, you can actually grow from that. And so when you encounter the smallness of your being, well, what can you do? Go out of it and then become a far stronger and more valuable being in terms of being, you might say, because of course everybody is equal in terms of rights and actually in terms of being part of a whole community,
yes,
which is incredible. As Dante says of the souls on the moon, some shine brighter than others. And that would be objectively true. The history books aren't full of everybody.
Yeah.
And so,
I certainly appreciate having the freedom of speech to get to say all of these things and to hear all of these disagree and, build on and whatever.
So that we constantly update ourselves so that we don't need a king dictating to us rules, and why we don't need a law for everything, especially any laws governing free speech, because the second we have a law governing free speech, well, all we can do is lie.
Yeah.
That's what I talk about with my students about art and poets. I say they can use whatever language they want, and they can paint whatever they want because they're artists. They express truth. And so nobody has the right to censor them.
Well, man, there's a lot more to say about this stuff. Like I sort of am tempted now to get on the noble lie and get on the poetry and all that stuff being taken out of the report.
Actually, address the symbols you called in about next time.
We'll see. Yeah, but let's make this a regular thing if we can, and we'll do it again.
I'd love to have you on, Wes, and I hope at the very least our friends enjoy hearing this, and maybe they'll call in and comment. And actually, it's a performative act as far as I'm concerned. Energeia, I'm just happy to have gotten to talk to you, and I appreciate you calling in. And we'll figure out how to get off this. So, listeners, this has been episode 016 with Wesley Schantz from Washington. We thank him for being on, and we're going to try and get off here. And if it's a little awkward, well, first times are always awkward. So.
All right. Take care.
Till next.
The audio you just heard was recorded in Anchor. Learn more at anchor.fm.